reports have claimed, and this article published on the 15th of September, that the covert Kenyan paramilitary team is responsible for the unconstitutional killing of terror suspects in nighttime raids. The reports are based on interviews with US and Kenyan diplomatic and intelligence officials. Good morning, Professor. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Azhar Wadi. Good morning.
It's wonderful having you on. Now, for how long have these covert paramilitary groups been operational in Africa?
It's not a new thing. It's been happening for a number of years. And I think one of the items that attracts the attention of many of us is the presence of American Special Forces under the flag of AFRICOM being coordinated out of Stuttgart in Germany, which sounds a bit strange. But the Americans have a heavy military presence in Africa, and in fact, they were looking for an African base. But none of the African countries were prepared to give them that pleasure, so they run their operations from Europe. Incredible as it might sound. But the idea of special forces, drone warfare around the continent, particularly hotspots, conflict areas, Somalia particularly, and so on, is disturbing because when we look into this in a little bit more detail, it becomes apparent that it's not only American Special Forces that has a military presence, but also several other European, the French in particular. And I think the explanation for that is, some European countries are looking after their former colonial possessions. There's still money to be made, especially natural resources. But there's another reason why we have so many of them present in Africa. That is for geostrategic reasons. So some parts of Africa lend itself to very important strategic positioning. And in my analysis, it mostly relates to the dynamics of the Middle East. So countries on the Indian Ocean coast, the east coast of Africa, the Horn of Africa in particular, and if you want to zoom in, Djibouti, which is a very small country next to Somalia, has attracted many military bases. And it's not only the Europeans or the Americans. There's a range of other foreign military interests that is camped out in Africa, including the Chinese, the Russians. There's a determined effort by the Turkish authorities to establish a foothold in parts of Africa. So it's across the board, and that's the one dimension is foreign government, if you want, with military presence. There's also the shadow side, which is private security companies, mercenaries, arms dealers, drug traffickers, that also has a heavy military presence around conflict zones in Africa. All in all, it's a disturbing picture.
Now, as these foreign powers, vie for military strongholds on the continent, do you think the potential for them clashing, and we've seen perhaps in Libya this happening as the Turks supporting the GNA, and you've got the Russians and Egyptians and others perhaps supporting the LNA on the other hand. Do you think there's the potential for countries to actually come to war on the African continent?
Sure. That's an intriguing question, which I haven't thought about deeply, because my immediate response would be that as far as foreign governments are concerned, they will probably play by some unwritten rule of the game, which is, I'll have a military base in Djibouti, next to the French one, next to the Chinese one, next to the American one, and we will look after our own interests and not get involved in firefights with each other, because that would lead to more trouble and solve nothing. But the problem is not that. The problem is that for geostrategic reasons, again, some of these foreign governments put their military and intelligence personnel on the continent to protect or advance their own interests. And it's not and often they use, diplomatic language. We are here on a bilateral basis. We are here to train you or equip or fight against crime or terrorism or violent extremism, as it is known now. Or we are here to participate in peacekeeping. So we mean, it's peaceful. We mean well. But there's no doubt that if you dig a little bit deeper, that the national interest of these foreign governments, countries, sits at the heart of the presence of their military personnel in the continent. And Libya shows us how bad it can play out. I guess Somalia is another example where things can go badly wrong. But I don't foresee, if you push me a little bit, I don't foresee American special forces getting involved in a gunfight with, say, the Chinese or the Turks or so. That's not on the cards. What is on the cards is this very unfortunate situation where fragile states or even failed states like Somalia or Libya, DRC, the eastern part of the DRC, and there might be one or two other examples, Mali comes to mind, provides fertile ground for the contestation between these foreign forces, whether they are government-sanctioned or private or of a mercenary nature. And it's not inconceivable that there will be casualties on all sides. And by the way, let me add that those who pretend to come and make and keep the peace in Africa, the superpowers, if you want, the permanent members of the Security Council, they are also the world's biggest arms dealers and arms sellers. And they supply Africa with a never-ending stream of arms and ammunition. And that gets used by all sides. The Eastern DRC is notorious for that. There's too much of a flow of weapons, small arms and light weapons on the continent. It's another problem. So Africa is not innocent in this. We have an arms industry. We also manufacture these things and sell it. There's supposed to be a committee that must prevent arms from being sold to conflict zones. But why is it that South African ammunition is found in Yemen on the ground? So there's another problem there.
Now, the independence of the host nations, Djibouti, for example, as you said, is a very tiny country, almost non-existent in the memories or knowledge of many people. When a huge superpower like the US comes and establishes a military base on its soil, how much of its independence is actually lost? Does that, in inverted commas, just become a colony of the US? Are they dictated to, or do they still maintain some sense of independence?
Yeah, no, I mean, you ask a very good question. I've been to Djibouti before, and for me, it's a tragedy. If you look at this through African eyes, Djibouti has become a giant warehouse, a military warehouse. And the Djiboutians, if there's such a word, have sold their soul to the highest bidder. So the Chinese offers, a lot of money, and they set up a military base. So does the French and the Americans. And, on a personal note, I must tell you that what happens to the population around those military bases, servicing, these foreign soldiers, is tragic. It's not only a question of, goods and services. It's also a question of young women being exploited by these soldiers. I've seen this with my own eyes. It's an enormous tragedy for me and for any caring person. And indeed, as you point out, there's no sovereignty left once you walk that road. And disturbingly, these beautiful, romantic, idyllic, if you want, Indian Ocean islands, known for their natural beauty, tourism potential, they are geostrategically very well located in the Indian Ocean to provide a rear base for those who have interests in making war or fighting wars in the Middle East. So a small country like the Seychelles, with no real income apart from tourism and some fishing, gets seduced by the Americans and or the Europeans. They simply park their drones there, or they send their warships to the only big harbor in the Seychelles for repairs. And you can imagine what happens next. Once soldiers sit in a foreign country and there's a military base, the surrounding population gets affected. In my view, not in a positive. So if you sell your land to a foreign power to put up a military base to make some money, you pay a heavy price down the road. And this is happening in Africa. And I'm afraid the AU, the African Union, who was supposed to look after our peace and security interests, do not have the wherewithal, the political power, I guess, to override some of these disturbing developments.
Professor, if I can, ask you one more question before we need to go to the break. These forces come into a country, particularly, or sometimes we see when they are natural resources. So if it's gas in Mozambique, you see a flurry of activity around there. If it's in Mali or the Central African Republic, in that region, cobalt, coltan, uranium, maybe it's oil in different parts, or geostrategic location like the Gulf of Aden and the Horn of Africa, and then the Mediterranean Sea. Again, we see with the Turks and the Greeks and the Russians all active in Libya around the gas fields there. And then along with that, you almost have a natural proliferation of these extremist groups, Islamic extremist groups that then pop up. Can there be some correlation, or do we have any information on foreign countries and their forces, be it intelligence or military, funding and using these specific groups to knock out opponents, to pressurize governments into giving deals in certain ways to certain companies, be it East or West?
Sure. This is a pattern it's a good question. It's a pattern that we saw. Yeah, I don't know how to answer it exactly, except to say that it's a pattern that we saw in the Middle East, where insurgents or violent extremists would be secretly funded. The CIA did that, creates the Mujahideen, evolves into some other kind of a monster down the road. There's no real evidence that I'm aware of that suggests that Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, or any of these associated violent extremist groups are secretly being funded or used as proxies. I do think that they grew from the ground up. I'm thinking of the situation in Cabo Delgado, for example. It looks like an ISIS or an IS affiliated terror group exploiting the grievances of the local population and turning this into some kind of a religious fanatic kind of warfare, low level warfare, guerrilla warfare. But I'm not aware that foreign forces are necessarily servicing or equipping or funding them in an attempt to gain some strategic position. What I do know is that, unfortunately, as you yourself point out, the moment a significant natural resource, a reserve of gas, oil, or some sort of mineral is discovered in a country in Africa, it's a curse. It's not a blessing, because we don't have the governance structures to manage the benefits properly, and that leads to the exploitation by foreigners. And Mozambique is another example. I think it's the dynamic around oil and gas, lots of money. The French and the Americans who have interests in exploiting the gas and selling it to the Middle East, by the way. And that is now the knock-on effect, is it's attracted all sorts of other bystanders and interested parties, including the Turks and the Russians and the American special forces, again, who believe that they can make a difference or exploit or benefit from the situation.
Professor Anton van Niekerk, professor at the Center for Defense Security Management at the School of Governance at Wits University. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us this morning.
It's a pleasure, and goodbye.
Osman's Taj Mahal Spice and Rice. For over 80 years, Osman's Taj Mahal have been perfecting the art of the perfect blend of spices, pure, aromatic, and well-seasoned. Spices to tantalize you.